Okay, so hello everyone. We want to welcome and thank you for joining us to today's Stroke ISIG webinar. Let me go ahead and get started with sharing my screen. So this webinar is part of a series of webinars that's put on by ACRM and the ACRM Stroke ISIG to help bring needed information to rehabilitation researchers and providers. This is a link if you're interested to visit the Stroke ISIG webpage. And I can also paste this into the chat if anyone's interested. If you're not a member and are interested in joining, follow this and you can find out more information. You can also contact the Stroke ISIG chair, who is, I believe I saw is in here today, Dr. Veronica Rowe, and this is her contact information. And then my name is Suzanne Burns, and I'm the moderator and the chair of the ACRM Stroke ISIG webinars. So I'll be moderating you today, or this meeting today. So welcome, and we are so excited that you are here. Next, I'm going to have Natalie Gilmore introduce our speakers and their presentation today.
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, I'm Natalie Gilmore. I'm one of the co-chairs of the ACRM Stroke ISIG Aphasia and Other Communication Disorders Task Force. I co-chair it with Emily Braun, who is also on the call. And we are so delighted to have Dr. Sarah Wallace and Elena Donoso Brown with us today to be presenting this webinar on Introduction to AAC and Aphasia for the Rehabilitation Professional. So I'll just start out with a quick introduction. So Dr. Elena Donoso Brown is an occupational therapist and associate professor at Duquesne University. She earned her master's in occupational therapy from Duquesne University and her PhD in rehabilitation sciences from the University of Washington. Her clinical background is with individuals post-stroke and also with traumatic brain injury during the acute phase of recovery and in the inpatient rehabilitation setting. She's developed a research agenda around understanding and assessing ways to optimize the implementation of home programs for persons with acquired brain injury to increase adherence. She is also the co-chair of the Movement Disorders Task Force for the Stroke ISIG. And this task force focuses on facilitating interprofessional collaborations among clinicians, students, consumers, and researchers, scientists interested in advancing stroke movement interventions. So we're delighted to have her here. And then I'll also introduce Dr. Sarah Wallace, who's a professor and director of the master's program in speech language pathology at the University of Pittsburgh. Her primary academic responsibilities involve leading and teaching in the speech language pathology program and participating in clinical education through speech network supervision. As an established investigator, Dr. Wallace is a member of the Communication Science and Disorders Pittsburgh Translational Aphasia Research Initiative, or also known as PITARI. This multi-investigator research team's mission is really to enhance and accelerate progress in translational aphasia research and brings together significant strengths in care for individuals with aphasia. So we are sure to have a wonderful presentation from both of these individuals today. I want to go ahead and let them get started, and then we can talk a little bit more about the Aphasia and Other Communication Disorders Task Force afterward. Okay, thanks all.
Thank you, Natalie. And thank you to your task force for bringing this presentation together. I just have one more slide to go over before we get started. I do want to advise that this meeting is being recorded. I'd like to ask all attendees to keep your phones and mics muted, keep your cameras turned off throughout the presentation. We do expect to have about 15 to 20 minutes available for discussion at the end of the webinar where you can ask questions. So please, if you have them before, then feel free to type them in the chat feature, and we can address many of those in the later part of the hour. So without further ado, I'm going to start sharing and send, and we'll let Sarah and our Dr. Wallace and Dr. Brown take over.
Well, hello, everyone. We are so grateful to be here today and to get to share with you all this presentation on the Introduction to AAC and Aphasia for the Rehabilitation Professional. I have learned a lot working with Dr. Sarah Wallace over the last several years about AAC and aphasia, and have grown in my own knowledge and research in that way. And so we're happy to be here today and to share this with you. So we want to kind of briefly, next slide, share some of our disclosures for funding of the work that we're going to be talking about today from the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, National Institutes of Health, Miami University, and some internal funding from Duquesne University as well. So the overview, a general agenda is to give you that introduction to AAC and models of aphasia rehabilitation and maybe how they've changed over the years and kind of expand that horizon. We'll also share evidence for individual AAC strategies. So you can walk away with some things today, and we'll outline those on the next slide, as well as conclusions, takeaways, and questions. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go along. We will be covering these 3 learning objectives. So again, defining augmentative and alternative communication, and hopefully you walk away with 3 strategies that you can use in your own practice to support expression for people with aphasia, as well as 3 strategies to support comprehension in people with aphasia that you can apply to your own practice. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Wallace to kind of define augmentative and alternative communication and get us started with that first learning objective.
Hey, thanks, Elena. And one of the great things about interdisciplinary and interprofessional work is that you get to learn a lot from each other. And I want to echo what Elena said, that I've had such a great opportunity in the work we've done so far to learn so much from her. And it's definitely shaped how I think about my clinical practice and my clinical research. So I'll start here. I think for me, it seems very foundational, but I like to start all of my presentations on these types of topics by defining the topics we're going to talk about so that we're all kind of starting from the same place. So augmentative and alternative communication is something that can help to support somebody's communication whenever they have unmet communication needs. And one of the key parts about that is going to be really important for our presentation today is that AAC can support individuals both on the production end and on the comprehension end of things. And this is incredibly important for individuals with aphasia who are experiencing a language disorder after a stroke or some type of brain injury, and they'll have difficulty across multiple modalities, speaking, understanding, reading, and writing. And these are all things that AAC can jump in and help someone with. Essentially, AAC's big role is to help meet unmet communication needs. And one of the things that we know is that even with our fantastic rehabilitation techniques, a lot of individuals with aphasia and also with with aphasia from stroke or traumatic brain injury are discharged at this point where we sometimes refer to as them hitting a plateau. We also know that maybe at best, some individuals are given some AAC interventions just at this kind of terminal point, maybe 1 or 2 sessions left with someone, and they're given AAC as a strategy because they still have this gap between what they want to be able to do and what they're able to do as a result of therapy. And this, I think, in part happens because restorative and compensatory strategies are seen as separate entities rather than something that can work together to help a person be able to better participate in activities. One thing that I like is we've started to see some change. So I think there's been a movement in a better direction where we're starting to reframe how we think about AAC for individuals with aphasia. And some of that I credit to models like AFROM, Ora Kagan and colleagues have worked on this model, thinking about how people with aphasia live with aphasia, and they touch on these various different components or domains. And one of those includes the ability of people with aphasia to be able to participate in life situations, which definitely involves or could be addressed by using AAC strategies. Roberta Ellman also talks about CAPE as an acronym for ways that people with aphasia can be best served by speech language pathologists. And she highlights these 4 different areas that are critically important for rehabilitation. And for one of the first times, AAC was really called out in a super prominent way, suggesting that it's one of the key components to what people with aphasia need to be able to best participate in life activities. And then even Audrey Holland, who's given us such great ideas and great wisdom in how we best serve people with aphasia, she talks about this idea of communication strategies or end arounds, or maybe we would call them workarounds, which essentially are just AAC strategies that allow people with aphasia to kind of bypass where they have some unmet needs or where there's some communication difficulties. And really, we're just talking about AAC. And last, in kind of this like, where are we headed or how are these 2 worlds coming together, is an article by Amy Dietz, Christy Weisling, and I that talks about how AAC has for a long time been seen as like, you do AAC or you do restorative therapy. And we talk a lot about how these 2 things, or AAC, can kind of have a dual purpose to both help with restoration and also compensation. And so I think a lot of this more recent work has pointed us in a direction where AAC strategies are starting to become more accepted. They're getting a little more limelight. And so it's really helpful for not just speech language pathologists, but other rehabilitation professionals like many of you who've attended today, to know about some of the strategies that are available and that can help people with aphasia. So we're going to spend some of our next slides talking about what some of these strategies are. And our intention here is to provide a very cursory kind of overview of some of the strategies that are out there and maybe give some tips and tricks to people, rehabilitation professionals who are wanting to implement or support some of these strategies with individuals with aphasia. And just like we started out with this definition from the beginning, we're really going to hit on these 4 core areas, talking about 2 areas within expression and then 2 areas within comprehension. So spoken expression is what we think of the most often when we think about AAC strategies, and even sometimes when we think about people with aphasia. It's where a lot of our research is focused. It's where a lot of speech language pathologists write a lot of their intervention goals. So because of that, of course, we have a lot of strategies listed in this area. The first of those is thinking about how people communicate using gestures. And there's a few techniques out there for teaching people with aphasia how to best use gestures for communication. And there's also a lot of research suggesting that comprehension is really high by listeners when people with aphasia gesture, but also when they gesture and speak at the same time. There's some really nice work by Miranda Rose focused on those kinds of ideas. So one thing you might do is encourage people with aphasia to use gestures in their communication to better communicate something they want to convey. Using writing is also a really helpful strategy, and we have a few instructional techniques. Those that are best probably known are the copy and recall treatments that focus on people with aphasia learning how to better write single words for communication purposes. And recently, and I might have included her text up here, Jamie Lee has also been doing some work related specifically to people with aphasia and the texting that they do. In terms of supporting writing, I think it's always helpful for professionals to keep paper, pen, and a marker handy. And so that the person might be encouraged to use a strategy that's just right there and handy for them. I've also seen a lot of people with aphasia who are discouraged because of the hemiparesis in their dominant hand they might be experiencing, or even because they have trouble writing more than a couple letters of a word. Their writing doesn't look like how it used to. And so I think a lot of encouraging people that they can write some partial words or some letters, or maybe they can even type some of the words if they have a phone handy. And so knowing that the written product, the final written product, doesn't have to look perfect is one of the things I found really useful in clinical work. Drawing's another communication strategy that is another reason to keep those pen, paper, and markers handy for individuals. We have some instructional techniques that involve copying, tracing, maybe matching, drawings at kind of a beginning level, and working people up from single words to communicating whole scenes or even cartoon strips to convey an entire story. There are some limited reports of carryover to everyday activities, and in part that can be because some people have resistance to drawing. We're prepping for our support group meeting next week, and one of my students is going to be talking about drawing as a method of communication with some of our individuals with aphasia. And I told her the best way to convince people that it doesn't matter if they're a really good artist is to have me practice drawing in front of them, because I'm not a good artist, but I can still communicate a message typically. And so I do a lot of counseling about drawing not needing to be perfect, which is actually supported by a lot of our research. Some details in the drawing does tend to help it be more communicative, but it doesn't necessarily matter if it's a high quality drawing or a poor quality drawing. I also do a lot of encouraging people to do air drawing. So if they're not comfortable having their piece of art on a piece of paper or dry erase board, maybe drawing something up in the air that can communicate a particular message can be really helpful. Written choice communication strategy is something that Kathy Garrett worked on early in her career, and has been one of these strategies that I think is stuck around and been used by a lot of people. It can be really helpful in people with aphasia being able to have some control over some of the decisions in their life and also communicate important information. Generally, written choice is considered a partner-dependent strategy. And so for the rehab professionals here, this is the kind of strategy that relies on you kind of driving the strategy. And for the speech-language pathologists here, this is the kind of strategy you want to be teaching your colleagues and the family members of people with aphasia. The strategy just looks like asking the person a question like, where do you live? And you might write live ? So just kind of some keywords, and then writing 3 choices out. And it's always important to have a way for the person to communicate that you haven't listed the choice that's important to them, so that they can indicate if there's something else that they want to communicate. But you just say the choices. So where do you live? Shadyside, Oakland, Morningside. And then another really important part of the strategy is verifying the person's answer. So if they point to Shadyside or take a pen and draw a little line near it, circling it and confirming that was their answer. Something I like to encourage for people whose family members may not be living with them is that you can do some written choice communication in a notebook, and the person can sometimes refer back to old written choice conversations to communicate something about an earlier conversation. Communication notebooks are one of the oldest AAC strategies that's been around. It's often been thought of as a way for people to communicate basic wants and needs, but now we're having a lot more research, and there's a lot more support from AAC experts that notebooks can have a lot of other purposes, such as sharing information, creating social closeness, and even performing traditional kind of social etiquette for that particular culture.
Thank you.
A few things that could be included in a notebook include things like an alphabet or letter chart if the person uses that. In our previous aphasia group, we had someone who had a new information pocket. So it was a place where if he had recently been to a sporting event or a concert, he would stick like the tickets from it in that little pocket. And so he could show those to the group. Maps are really common, I feel like, in Pittsburgh. This is a way that we spend a lot of time communicating to one another about the neighborhood that you live in. and which direction and which river do you need to cross and which tunnel do you need to go through. You also can include in a communication notebook information about how communication partners can best support the person. And one of the ways that seems to be supported in the research is by having the communication notebook be a shared communication space. So both communication partners, the person with aphasia and who they're talking with, can kind of like interact using the notebook and point to different things in the notebook together and reference it that way. So that's something that might be helpful for you in your setting. A couple of reminders. I mentioned the instructions, setting up a plan for updates. So having a family member or someone who can be in charge of making sure there's updates. And then always keeping in mind that a communication notebook should be used for things beyond just basic needs. People enjoy telling their story and sharing different life experiences. So the last area under expression or spoken expression for me to talk about is talking about speech generating devices. And for a lot of people, speech generating devices are what you think of when you think of AAC. Unfortunately, for the most part, we rely on a lot of case reports and single subject designs, potentially in part because of the heterogeneous nature of people with aphasia, and the need to do good technology matching means that there's just not kind of a uniform strategy that's used for all individuals, which limits some of the study designs that could be used. Some things we've learned from some of these case reports is that it's important to consider if the person needs to be able to form their own sentences. So some speech generating devices, the person has to select individual words, or they can select an entire phrase. We've also learned a lot about how much people with aphasia prefer and benefit from the use of text and images combined. And so I'd recommend looking for a device or a software that supports that. We also know that things like cognition and syntactic skills are really important for successful use. The use of or the availability of a facilitator or partner to help maintain the device. We need to provide instruction to individuals about how to use it. And I mentioned that in particular because I know when I was working clinically, when we would get someone a speech generating device, there was sometimes confusion by the rest of the team that that person would automatically know how to communicate. And I think about it a lot, like when I get my new phone and it takes me a couple of weeks, even though I know the software system, it takes me a couple of weeks to learn the use of that phone again. And so knowing that people require some instructional time to use that. And then like a lot of technology, the personalization of the interface is really important. So that can mean including personalized content, personalized images, and things like that. Right, and I have just a brief slide here to talk about written expression. This is one of the areas where we have some of the most limited research. Jane Marshall is currently doing some really interesting work on written expression treatments, and I'm really hopeful that she's going to be touching on some compensatory strategies as well in some of her coming work, because it is an area that we have a lot of need. We know that people with aphasia report that writing is time consuming and demanding. So one possibility that has been reported in the literature is the use of speech to text technology. So if someone's spoken expression is stronger than their written expression, this can be a strategy that might work for them. When I've seen people use this strategy clinically, they tend to have a more mild or even moderate aphasia, and the text may still come out with some errors in it, but they're able to make some edits and make the text more comprehensible to a communication partner. There's also word prediction software, which is incredibly common now, and and her colleagues have done some work with individuals with aphasia using these types of technology to support their written communication. I think that's going to wrap us up on expression. And I believe Elena is going to jump in here to talk a bit about auditory comprehension and reading comprehension.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so kind of moving to the other side of that chart here and thinking about comprehension in individuals with aphasia, and knowing, as a clinician, that in not being a speech language pathologist trying to deliver an intervention, being sure that the individual can understand what I'm asking them to do can be really important. So we're going to spend a little bit of time now talking about both auditory and reading comprehension and what we can do for that. Next slide. So auditory comprehension is important to consider across the phases of rehab, because these deficits do tend to persist into the chronic phase of recovery. And while they can get in the way, I think, as Sarah mentioned before, spoken expression is often where a lot of the emphasis is placed in intervention, even though, comprehension also plays a key role in how people are able to do their daily activities. So again, kind of looking holistically at these, I think from an interprofessional perspective, this is somewhere where there's a great opportunity for collaboration to really allow those of us who do also need to have the client have good auditory comprehension, integrate these strategies, while the speech language pathologists, focus on other areas that might be more specific to their discipline. Next slide. So one of the ways to support auditory comprehension is called augmented input. And this can be supplements to spoken speech, and they support auditory comprehension. So some of these you might recognize from some of the spoken expression things that were placed, but now the person who's doing them is the person trying to communicate or support comprehension. So writing down keywords in what you're trying to communicate to someone, or the use of images in what you're doing. And sometimes this also looks like demonstration, right? So if you're asking somebody to do something, demonstrating what it is you would like them to do, or having a picture of it can be really helpful. You can also use, a change in how you're emphasizing your words and including gestures. So these are all different things that you can do, and we'll talk about some different examples, but you use them with your spoken speech. So you're speaking and also writing or pointing to a picture or using a gesture that might help communicate something about what you're saying. Next slide. So an example of this could be a communication partner saying, "Did you see your surgeon?" And then you write the word surgeon. So again, having that pen and paper handy to make sure that you can write that written word on Tuesday and then use the calendar to kind of indicate that to the client. Those kind of augmented inputs can really support the comprehension. The person with aphasia, maybe their spoken expression is limited and they just are able to say yes or nod their head. Again, like other strategies that have been talked about, it's really important to, confirm that what your communication partner is saying is, accurate, and that you're getting the information you want. So again, using those. So yes, you did go to the surgeon, point to the word again, point to the calendar to confirm that entire kind of loop is closed. So that's a strategy. Again, I think they seem simple, but when used really intentionally, they can really help your communication partner with aphasia understand what it is you're trying to say and make sure that you're getting information that's, on target. Next slide. So we're going to talk about reading comprehension a little bit more as well. And Sarah and I are going to tag team this, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how to support reading comprehension through the use of aphasia friendly materials. So reading problems, again, individuals can have problems communicating across multiple modalities, and reading problems are can be a big part of this. And as you can see on the slide, there's lots of different reasons why people would want to engage with written text throughout their day. It isn't, like with the communication notebooks, just for safety or medical needs, but also for, what they're going to do that day, maybe their leisure activities, and for, establishing friendships and relationships with other people. You need to be able to engage with written text. I mean, if you think about how many people, text instead of call nowadays, you can see it, somehow the written language has even kind of upped the ante in some way. So this is an important area and a place where we want to support individuals with aphasia in being able to comprehend written text as well. Next slide. So this is kind of an overall framework from looking at the supports that people with aphasia have used in the past, and the process of where we can intervene. And what we're going to focus on as we go through this are the two areas in red. So you can do a really good evaluation, establish goals, and then you're going to trial some of these different things to help with reading, one of which could be the adaptation of materials, and the other, which Sarah's going to talk about, is the technology support. So we're going to start with the adaptation of materials. Aphasia-friendly techniques have been studied by Brennan and Rose and all those other folks listed down there to really provide a lot of evidence that these techniques do support written comprehension for individuals with aphasia. And what do they consist of is primarily increasing the white space in any given kind of written material, using large and standard font, so at least 18 point. Usually, I think we've used Arial or Calibri, so kind of keeping it very basic. Simplified syntax and vocabulary, so short phrases, small words, to try to be very brief, and then relevant images. So, you can see this example over here, looking at, someone showing the image of a home break-in and having a story there that goes with it. We're also going to go and see a couple of different examples of how we can use these kind of interdisciplinarily. One of the projects that Sarah and I worked on together was looking at upper extremity home practice for individuals with aphasia and seeing if the use of preferred music playlists supported their adherence to practice. In doing so, we really wanted to support these individuals in understanding what we were asking them to do, which was where OT and SLP kind of combined to create these, what we would call aphasia-friendly logbooks. And the picture of the dog there is because, one of the things that we did was we tailored all these home practice programs to the things that people needed and wanted to do in their daily life with their more affected upper extremity. And in doing that, one of our participants' goals was to be able to brush his dog while using his affected upper extremity. So that's just a nice reminder of, keeping those things client-centered and patient focused. So we used aphasia-friendly materials in a couple different ways. One of them that you see here is to engage in outcome measures that were typically used for this population related to upper extremity motor function. So this was how we adapted the motor activity log scale for our participants with aphasia. So you can see here kind of the scale, with first the image of what we were asking them to rate. So the motor activity log asks, how much do you use your more affected upper extremity to do this task? So in this case, to hold a book. And so you can see we have short syntax there, hold a book, and we have the picture of the two hands holding the book right there to kind of support that understanding, as well as kind of graphics on the ends of each scale, and again, simple words. But that wasn't, so that's how we modified that particular thing, or that particular scale, but it wasn't just those modifications, because this is again where you can increase that auditory comprehension as well. If we go to the next slide, you can see how you could use some of those techniques, writing those words, pointing, crossing things out, to really, again, engage in supporting both auditory and written comprehension at the same time. Yeah, this is one of the ways in which we adapted the kind of instructions for the individuals using these principles again. The goal here was picking up a cup. This was just a sample. That is my husband. He's now famous again. No, and you can see we had the goals there with very simple syntax, and then using images, both of what is the task that we're asking you to do, as well as again, we were looking at music with music and without music. This was a week they would listen to music. They had the symbol in the corner so that it was visible to them. So yeah, thank you. You're right. We also made aphasia-friendly modifications to allow participants to track their practice as well. So again, this kind of combines some of the aphasia-friendly materials with some of the written expression kinds of things as well. So we wanted to make sure that people could indicate how many repetitions they did, as well as integrate the goal. So again, we used whole numbers and tried to use the shading to indicate, where the goal was, that they were supposed to do 3 sets, 20 repetitions. We also had them record the start and end time if they were able. But so you can see, again, we're using white space, simplified terms, and different visual cues to support their ability to record in the logbook. And as Sarah mentioned as well, instruction, right? So we instructed them on how to use this chart and graph, and made sure that they could complete it independently. If not, we could make modifications to it. Similar here, again, using visuals for the scales. We wanted to get a sense of how much over the week they practiced that exercise and how they felt about it. So using, again, graphics, simplified syntax, and a lot of white space in this one. What did our participants say? We did do a little bit, had a qualitative element to this study, and what we're going to focus on is kind of thinking about the instructions, although they give us feedback on everything. They did talk about the written instructions being really helpful, that it was very clear as far, it said what it said. It said what I was supposed to do. I wasn't wondering what I needed to do. It was very direct as to what was there. There were things that were sometimes hard. So we talked about how recording the times could be difficult for some people. And so that was sometimes a barrier. So it was something I think you need to think about tailoring, maybe even more than we did, to the participants. And then they really liked the in-person demonstrations, but they wanted more. So thinking about, how could we incorporate maybe videos into this instead of just pictures or things like that? Again, it was all paper-based, and that was maybe didn't come through here. Maybe it was in a different set of quotes, but there was a lot of difficulty in how many papers we had to do this. And sometimes managing those could be a challenge. One other example of using aphasia-friendly modifications is in medication instructions. And this is Anna Saylor's master's thesis project. Sarah was her chair and I was on the committee. And she did a really nice job of looking at the occupation of medication management and thinking about how people with aphasia might have barriers to that and what could be done to support them. And so she did a nice study comparing the comprehension of medication instructions, both in people with aphasia and people without aphasia, and kind of applying aphasia-friendly principles to one set of directions and having, seeing what the comprehension was like. So what I want to show on the next slide is a common, this is what you usually get, right? I don't know how many of you read them. I have trouble reading them. So, you know, they're very dense, very text heavy. But so this was one of her samples of the kind of standard medication instructions, and then followed it with questions. And then using aphasia-friendly principles, we go to the next slide, you can see how that was changed. Okay, so again, that increased white space, you actually get a visual of what the medication looks like, uses and how to use all there. But again, it takes up more space, right? And to get all that information, you're going to end up taking more space. And what she found, if we go to that next slide, is that you know, participants without aphasia did better in the comprehension questions, regardless of modified versus unmodified compared to people with aphasia. However, the modified instructions benefited somewhat the participants without aphasia as well. And then here, the participants with aphasia had a significant increase in their comprehension with the modified, but they still didn't quite get up to participants without aphasia. So that suggests that, you know, even more, you know, whether it's auditory or visual or some other kind of support would be useful. So, you know, overall, these aphasia-friendly modifications are helpful. They still should be combined with other techniques. And, you know, considering paper and video demonstrations, which again is where maybe technology can come in to help, would be beneficial. Okay, Sarah's going to go over some of those technology supports. So,
yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I love about hosting a presentation is that we get to talk about some of the work that we've been doing and also highlight some of our students' work. So I appreciate that opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit, as Elena said, about technology that can support reading. And this may not be what you think about when you think about traditional AAC, but we're going to spend a little bit of time kind of going over it. Again, in considering the definition of AAC and what people with aphasia need to meet their communication needs. So I'm going to talk about text-to-speech systems, which generally take some written text. You can upload that text or take a photo of it. The text is analyzed and it produces some type of spoken output. So text and spoken output are presented at the same time. And we believe this might be helpful for people with aphasia because it can reduce cognitive and linguistic demands. People with aphasia themselves have told us that although they like some of the modifications that Elena was just talking about, for some types of reading that they do, especially reading books or magazines for pleasure, they want to be more independent and they don't want to have to rely on another person to modify their written output or their written text. And then text-to-speech also offers a number of features that can be adjusted to meet someone's needs. So here's a quick list of some of the text-to-speech systems that are out there. They range really widely from free to a couple $100. The features that are available, the platforms they work on, there's quite a bit of variability. And I think I'm going to skip over this for now. This is just an example of what we've used in some of our research. And I just want to highlight that a number of our studies have looked at actual articles from newspapers to try to get at this, like what people with aphasia want to use technology to help them read. And knowing that we would spend a lot of time, I've summarized a lot of the research here from some of our recent studies. And generally what we've had the opportunity to do is look at different types of written passages and how this technology changes comprehension and also time spent. And a couple key points from some of these findings. Some people with aphasia experience increases in comprehension when given text-to-speech systems. That seems to happen when the information is a bit longer, so longer narratives and newspaper articles. Sometimes people don't experience comprehension differences, but they often, if they don't experience comprehension differences, they maintain their level of comprehension and tend to be much faster. And so there's an efficiency factor, which I think is really important long-term for people with aphasia. And although people have some of these general preferences, so they tend to prefer using text-to-speech, they tend to prefer when the output is at a medium rate And they tend to prefer word or sentence highlighting. We don't see comprehension differences with those different features adjusted. We've had the really awesome experience in the last year or so to be working with people with aphasia who are actually reading whole books to see what text-to-speech is like when they're reading books. And we're getting some of the similar types of reports. Some people increase in comprehension. Everybody seems to be faster. And people really like using text-to-speech, which is great. So some of the implications from this are that we want to have people be evaluated across different types of supports in different conditions. Multiple approaches might be needed. Efficiency could be a really relevant goal, especially for the individuals with aphasia who tell us, I've stopped reading novels for fun, not because I can't read it, but because it takes up all of my day. And I don't have the time and I don't have the energy for that type of reading. People's preferences seem to matter quite a bit. And the features can be adjusted to meet different people's needs, but we don't necessarily have one suggestion for exactly how the features might be set for people with aphasia. So to wrap up some of our big picture conclusions, people with aphasia do require special considerations for AAC. With this language impairment that comes with having aphasia, the setup and their needs related to augmentative and alternative communication are a bit different. And I hope everyone walks away with this idea that AAC includes a really broad range of strategies to support all kinds of people with complex communication needs. I suspect most people did not plan to hear a lot about reading today and how we can support reading. So I hope that message was really driven home. I do have our contact information up here so that people can reach out if they have questions, comments, or anything like that they'd like to talk with us further. And then I'm happy to also field some of the questions that are coming in the chat box as well. Oh, Whitney, thank you. Yeah, pharmacy instructions. We actually, like the student and I, really dug deep in looking at different medication instructions, and I cannot comprehend most of them. Yeah, I love this idea about multilingual individuals with aphasia. So one of the things that I think is important, Whitney, that what you're saying makes me think of is that a lot of the communication strategies that we're suggesting, I think also help when people speak different languages and have communication needs or don't have communication needs. So while I don't currently have any of these folks enrolled in any of our studies, I'm thinking carefully, and Elena might be too, I think that point is really relevant. And my hypothesis, although I'd be curious about your thoughts, my hypothesis is that people who are multilingual may experience an even greater benefit, but I think, any benefit at all would be a nice finding. And in Kate's question, any suggestions or existing resources on supporting people with communication difficulties to engage in court settings or where there are complex legal and advocacy meetings? Kate, that's such a good question. And I know I myself have been involved in one such case, but there isn't really sophisticated information that's consistent across the country in terms of what people with aphasia should be given when they're in a court. There may be some other expert on this call who has more information, but I also think the National Aphasia Association might have something. And I'm going to look that up while I see if anyone else wants to chime in and correct me or.
I'm not an expert by any means of the imagination, but I have a friend who I asked this question of, and she's a lawyer, and a lot of the courts provide like ADA facilitators, so to help with just helping that person with aphasia. So that's what I got from my lawyer friend.
Okay. Sorry that I don't have a better answer for you, Kate, but I do know that there are things out there about this topic. And I'm seeing lots of things come into the chat. So maybe there are things that are going to help you too. And I'm going to make the chat much bigger so that I can read it. Okay, Michelle, Whitney mentioned Michelle's work on advanced directives might have some guidance for some of the legal, and Michelle then also commented, thank you, Michelle. Oh, sorry, different Michelle, it's too funny. But different Michelle commented, in Canada, there is Communication Disabilities Access Canada. I've seen this American Bar article. Thanks for sharing that, Jackie. I was trying to pull that up. And then Roberta, I'm not sure if the previous aphasia access paper has a comment about legal issues or aphasia. It's a really good question. I just don't actually know the answer.
There's another question above that from Lindsay, who is wondering about people are ready to trial high-tech AAC. Are there any go-to trial apps, ones that are not pediatric focused?
Yeah, I think that depends so much, Lindsay, on the person and some of their beginning needs. So there are some softwares, usually focus on software, not hardware, but there are some softwares that allow a lot of modification. Proloco to Go comes to mind, but it's on the pricey end. That can help identify if somebody, how they can do in terms of like forming sentences and things like that. And so that can be the kind of app that can be really helpful because it allows for a ton of modification. But then there are some other apps like for example, PRC and Tobii Dynavox that offer some trials that can be like a soft version or easy version, or sorry, light version of their software that allow you to kind of test some things out, which is great. Yeah, thanks to everybody for coming to my rescue with some great ideas for the legal questions. And yeah, you're right, Whitney, Lingraphic is another one that has a free resource for individuals who want to trial devices. Yeah, trialing devices is a whole talk in and of itself, but I think, Lindsay, you're really right to look for things that are not as pediatric focused, remembering that devices that allow you to make some modifications can allow you to personalize it to that person a little bit. And even if you can just do a little bit of that during a trial, you might be able to get some really good, useful information for a evaluation report. Other questions? I want to copy down some of these resources. Thank you, Michelle. That's not one I know a lot about in Canada, so that's great.
These are wonderful questions that have come in, and I appreciate the audience being so engaged and asking these questions. They're great. Our speakers today, Dr. Wallace and Dr. Brown, I want to thank you for sharing your expertise. I personally have learned so much about strategies in AAC and aphasia, and I know I speak on behalf of everybody that we're really appreciative of you taking the time to present to us in this webinar today. I am going to go ahead and share my screen again.
While you're doing that, this is Veronica Rowe. I just want to echo thanks and appreciation for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And thanks to Suzanne Burns for help organizing it. I really appreciate that. Can I squeeze in a quick question?
Sure.
Thanks. Sorry, I should have spoken up sooner, but it was interesting to hear about the legal stuff. I really liked the idea of modifying the different standardized assessments like the MAL. A lot of granting agencies are encouraging, insisting, and they should, that we include people with aphasia, that we don't exclude them just because they have aphasia. But it's so hard sometimes to do things like the MAL when they have aphasia. Have you done that with any other standardized assessments?
So we did, and this was always listed as a limitation because we did change things. So we did, we modified the COPM and included pictures and the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, which, is a semi-structured interview and helps gain, things that people are interested or need or want to do in their daily lives. And so we set up a whole bunch of pictures. We based that off, there was a case report in the British Journal of Occupational Therapy who did this, and we kind of modeled it and we changed the rating scales. But truth is, we didn't officially validate it, right? So we didn't actually move forward with a validation trial to, see, does the tool still work in the same way? But it's definitely, I think, an area that, could be developed and really support, I think, a lot of the efforts for inclusion of individuals with aphasia in more research studies. I don't know, Sarah, what else?
Yeah, I think I was starting to write this in the chat, so I'll just say it out loud that I think this is one of the big challenges, just like you said, Veronica. I think it's critically important that people with aphasia are not excluded from research studies. But as Elena mentioned, we can make some of these modifications, but then the validation of those tools may come into question. And so understanding like that, how much it will slow things down if we need to make all of those tools aphasia friendly before we continue to move forward. So I think it's trying to find a balance in that. And I know there are a lot of people, aphasiologists, I want to speak for all of them. I think there's a number of aphasiologists who are eager to collaborate with professionals across different areas to try to help modify some of the tools or modify their own study procedures to best understand how people with aphasia can be included. And so I think in addition to modifying tests, I think the other answer is, doing something that Elena and I've been fortunate enough to be able to do, which is find someone who you can work with in other disciplines who have similar goals and missions, and try to find ways to best include people. I get to talk with Elena about how to include people with aphasia, and she talks to me about participation and what that looks like. And as an aphasiologist who subscribes to the life participation model, it's funny to have it be collaborating with an OT where I'm like, oh my goodness, I have such a clearer view of participation even than I did many years ago. So yeah, I think that's part of what we need to be able to do to get that to happen, but it's not easy.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. And think you guys have had a huge first step in doing these. I'm also thinking what great student projects this could potentially be between partnering OTs and speech students to create standardize them in aphasia-friendly ways. That would be really great. So kudos. Thank you for a great presentation too.
Yeah, thank you.
That was a great question and comment. I really appreciated you bringing the conversation that direction, because it is so important to think about people with aphasia in research. And actually looking at the chat, it reminds me that Natalie and Emily wanted to do a real quick mention about the task force that they're involved in, the aphasia and other communication disorders task force. So I will pass the mic over to you guys too.
Suzanne, thank you so much for hosting this for us and helping us. I really appreciate that. And yes, thank you again, Dr. Wallace and Donoso Brown, for presenting today and taking the time to share this really important work with us. Even as somebody who works with individuals with aphasia as a speech pathologist, I learned. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so I think I'll quickly I put in the chat, and also I want to share a little note. I don't know if people know about this, but there's so many amazing resources shared here, and actually you can save the chat if you click the little three dots. Does everybody know how to do this? If you open the chat and then click the ellipses, click save chat, it'll save it to your Zoom folder. So it's a really nice way of copy. I don't know, maybe everybody already knew this, but I did not know. And so I feel like it's it's kind of related to the topic we're talking about today too, technology. So, well, not all tech, but either way. All right. So regardless, I'm going to also, I think something that we do as a part of the aphasia and other communication disorders task force as part of the stroke ISIG, I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen quickly. We meet every second Thursday of the month at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. You can see I put the link in the chat, but you can also see the web page here. And something that we have that I'd like to just feature is this resource database for aphasia and related disorders. And what we have here are many different links that go to other links that are useful. And I think that there were a number of links that were shared today in the chat that will actually be really useful for us to include here. Maybe some of those legal resources, some of the other information that was shared. So just wanted to highlight that quickly. If you want to get in touch with Emily and I, and to try to join the task force, we're always welcome. We're always looking for new members. And some of the things we do is create educational content for other professionals working with individuals with aphasia and communication disorders after stroke, for their patients or for families. We also try to provide learning opportunities like today. And overall, we are an active group that is interested in, increasing education about language and communication disorders after stroke. So please join us if you can. We'd be happy to have you. So thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Of course. Thank you.
So,
this was really well organized. Thank you for your help.
Perfect. Well, I just want to remind everybody that the recordings from today will be available within the next 24 to 48 hours. And I want to encourage you to recommend these webinar series to any colleagues you may have who are interested in learning more about topics that we present on. The Stroke ISIG will be completing 2 webinars annually, and we will let you know about those upcoming events. And so I'm just going to share my slide one last time. And this is just information about our conference in 2023. Feels like we just had the conference in 2022, but we're planning ahead to Atlanta this fall. So we look forward to you joining us there. But otherwise, this concludes our episode for today. So please consider joining our ISIG and some of the task forces, especially the aphasia and communications, other communications task force that we have, and joining us at the ACRM annual conference. Be safe and stay healthy, everyone, and we hope to have you join us again for a future webinar. Thank you.